only on C-SPAN.
Now an address from Saddleback Church Senior Pastor Rick Warren. He spoke about the role of religion in public life. Reverend Warren was asked by President-elect Obama to deliver the invocation at his presidential inauguration on January 20th. It's about 35 minutes.
Please. Assalamu alaikum. I want you to know how deeply and profoundly and truly humbled I am to be with you here tonight. Of all the people in the world, you invited me. I love Maher Hathout, the founder of MPAC. He is a dear friend of mine. He is a genius. If you haven't read his book on justice, you need to read his book on justice. By the way, you know that fundraising, that was pretty good, wasn't it? Now, I always say, do your giving while you're living, then you'll be knowing where it's going. I don't understand the people who wait till they die to give. When it comes to giving, some people just stop at nothing. And actually, I tell Christians in my church, I say, you know, you've seen these bumper stickers. They say, if you love Jesus, tithe. Any fool can honk. Let me just get this over real quickly. I love Muslims. I also happen to love Hindus and Jews and Buddhists. Now, this one will shock you. I happen to love Democrats and Republicans. And for the media's purpose, I happen to love gays and straights. So, you know what? I can't even get my wife to agree with me on everything. So why should we expect to agree on everything? I mean, I have 5 people in my family. We all like 5 different kinds of music. Does that limit my love for them? Of course not. Whoever came up with the idea that you have to agree with everybody on everything in order to love them? You see, I'm commanded to love. We are told in scriptures, love your neighbor as yourself. And I love you. Let me make another statement here. I'm just dieseling right now, and that is, we're all immigrants. Even Native Americans came from somewhere, across the Aleutian Islands or wherever, but we're all immigrants. And America is as much a Muslim right for Muslim Americans as it is a Jewish right for Jewish Americans or Christian Americans or atheist Americans or anybody else. I love America. And I love the idea stated by that great theologian Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? I think it's historic that we have a first-generation immigrant who's just been elected president. I think that's historic. I really is. Now, I do a lot of travel. I was recently on a trip where we did 46,000 miles in 45 days, literally ran around the world. And in every country I went into, we met with government leaders, with religious leaders, and with business leaders for a thing we call the peace plan. And I've noticed that you know, I always thought Christians were misunderstood until I started hearing about Muslims. Have you figured that one out? Yeah. And I've noticed 2 things. The media almost never gets it right. And I've also noticed that the media loves conflict. They don't like peace. There's no story in that to them. They want conflict. And if they can't get it, guess what? They'll create it. They will create it. And I will say to you, as I've said to many, many people around the world, let me just be frank. Al-Qaeda no more represents Islam than the Ku Klux Klan represents Christianity. They're not what we're about, they're not what you're about. And I have many, many dear neighbors and friends sitting down here, like Talal Beydoun and Maysoon and Yasser, my next door neighbor, and so many that I love. My life changed about 6 years ago. Three things happened. When I started Saddleback Church in Orange County 28 years ago. I was 25 years old. I moved to Southern California from Texas, where I just finished my master's degree, and we arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. No money, no members, no building. I didn't know a single person in the Saddleback Valley. And I arrived at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of rush hour traffic in LA. Now you got to understand, I'm a country boy. I was raised up in Northern California in a little town of less than 500 people. And when I got to Southern California, I looked around on the freeway and I said, God, you got the wrong guy. What in the world am I doing here? And we pulled off an off-ramp and we went into a real estate office. I found the first real estate office. This is January 1, 1980. And I met a guy named Don Dale, and I said, my name is Rick Warren. I'm 25 years old. I'm here to start a congregation. I don't have any members. I don't have any building. I don't know anybody in the area. And I don't have any money, and I need a place to live. And he did what you just did. He laughed. To make a long story short, within 2 hours, that man had found us a condo. We signed the papers on it. He got us the first month rent-free and nothing down. And that man became the first member of my church. As I was going to this real estate, we were driving to this little condo, and I said, hey, Don, you go to church anywhere? He goes, no, I hate church. I said, great, you're my first member. I said, I'm starting a church for people who hate church. And so we started. I actually held the first service. My wife and I preached the first sermon to my wife. She didn't like it. She said it's too long. It's been downhill ever since. Fast forward that to this week. Before I came here tonight, I did the first of 16 Christmas services for the nearly 50,000 people who will show up for Christmas this week at Saddleback Church. It's a 120-acre campus, over 100,000 members. And all my life, all I wanted to do was just pastor church for life. I love stability. I have now watched an entire generation grow up in South Orange County. And I've watched people who were born who now serve on my staff, and watched them grow up through little childhood ages of toddlers, and then watch them start to talk and to walk, and then to go into grade school, and then go through those awkward junior high years when nobody can figure out what we're thinking, and then break your heart in high school and go off to college and come back and settle down and get a job. And I love that. I love stability. I know more about my community than any politician will, because I've been listening to their problems for nearly 30 years. And I care about them, and I love them. Now, I was happy just doing that. I was not known nationally or anything. I really didn't want to be nationally known. That's why I never went on TV, because I didn't want to be a, quote, televangelist. I don't like those guys. I just don't happen to like them. I'm not putting them down. It's just not my style. And I just wanted to be a local church pastor and care for people in that village. Oh, Pastor Rick, he's been there for 40 years. And then three things happened 6 years ago. Number one, my wife got cancer, breast cancer. And while she was going through all of that, she had had an experience where one day she was laying on the couch and she read a magazine, and it said 14 million children orphaned by AIDS in Africa. And my wife was shocked by that. And she said, I had to admit, I didn't know a single orphan. She said, I couldn't imagine 14 million orphans just by one disease, AIDS, much less 14 million in the world. Well, we now know there are 146 million orphans in the world. It's a big passion of mine, dealing with the orphans around the world. But she said, I didn't even think about it. She said, I was so shocked, I dropped the magazine. And she said, I kind of heard a voice, God speaking to me. And God said, Kate, you can either let this pain into your heart and it'll change your life and I will use you to make a difference for good in the world. Or you can get on with your life as a soccer mom, suburban, pastor's wife, Bible teacher, whatever. My wife is the most courageous woman I've ever met. And she said, I don't know what this means, but I'm willing to become a spokesman for AIDS. When she first came to me and she began to talk to me about it, I go, well, that's great, babe. You supported me in my vision. And look what's happened, and I'm going to support you. And we've been a partner now for 33 years. And so we're going to support each other. Now, it's not my vision, but I support you. But the more she talked about it, the more it began to grab me. It began to grab my heart. And I began to realize that I hadn't cared about something that really mattered. 40 million people have AIDS right now, and there will have been 100 million by the year 2010 to 10 to 15. And, we say in our house that the most powerful language is pillow talk. It's what we say when we're laying in bed at night and nobody else is around. And it began to grab my heart. One day, my wife was going to Africa a lot to study how the churches there were dealing with people with AIDS. And so I thought, I'll go with her. And so I went with her to do what I do, which is I train leaders. In the last nearly 30 years, I've trained over 500,000 leaders in 162 countries. And in that leadership time, I just said, well, that's what I do. So I went to South Africa, and I taught a leadership seminar for just normal people, and we broadcasted or simulcasted to 400 sites across the continent and had about 80,000 leaders go through that training. And my wife was visiting different congregations. And I thought that's why I was there. But sometimes God is sneaky. And you think you're going for one reason, and God has something else in mind. And after I finished teaching that 3-day seminar, I said, take me out to a village. I just want to see a congregation. I don't care what religion or what denomination it is. Just show me a congregation. So we get in the Jeep, and we go out in the middle of the bush in South Africa, and we come upon this little church. It's in a tent, and it's 75 people, 50 adults and 25 kids orphaned by AIDS. Now, these 50 adults, all they have is a tent, and they're dirt poor themselves, but they're caring for 25 orphans. And they're growing a garden for the kids, and they're feeding the kids from the garden, and they've got a few old school books, and they're teaching the kids, and each night the kids are sleeping in the tent because there's no other place. And I looked at this little church, and I said, this little congregation, band of people, is doing more to help the poor than my rich megachurch. And that was like a knife in my heart. And I said, something's going to change. I'm so sorry that I missed this. And I got out of the Jeep, and the young African pastor came around the tent, and he looked at me. Now, we're in the middle of nowhere, and he goes, I know who you are. And I said, how do you know who I am? He said, you're Pastor Rick. Now, a lot of people have read my book, but they don't know what I look like. And I go, how do you know who I am? He said, I download your sermons every week. I said, wait a minute. You're here in a village with no water and no electricity. How in the world do you get internet access? He said, they're putting the internet in every post office in South Africa. They're called PITs, Public Information Terminals. And he said, so once a week, I walk an hour and a half to the nearest post office, and I download your weekly teaching. And then I walk an hour and a half back, and he said, I teach it to my people. He said, Rick, you're the only training I've ever had. When he said that, something cracked in my heart. And I went out that night, and I sat down under the African sky, and I said, okay, God, what else am I missing? I know leadership is a big deal. Training leadership, been doing that for years. But I totally missed the AIDS thing. So what else am I missing? And I started thinking about all the countries, the 162 countries that I'd trained leaders from. And I thought in every single country, I kept seeing the same 5 problems. I call them the 5 global Goliaths, the 5 global giants. These are the problems that affect not millions of people, but billions of people. These are the problems everybody has failed at. The United Nations, the United States, everybody has failed at these. There are a lot of problems that affect millions of people, but there's some that affect billions. And I believe that there are 5. Number 1 is spiritual emptiness. Most people don't know that they're not an accident, that they were made for a purpose, that they are deeply loved by God, that He has a plan and purpose for their life. Spiritually empty. Number 2 is, this surprises a lot of people, corruption. Self-centered leadership. And the fact is, folks, there are self-centered leadership in every area of life. In academics, in health, in religion, in politics. Most people start off in life genuinely wanting to make a difference with their life. They're really sincere. Most people start off in life wanting to be of service. But somehow after a while, service becomes serve us. And all of a sudden it becomes all about feathering my nest, getting reelected, protecting my assets, encompassing my power, becoming more famous or important. And all of a sudden the whole deal of being a servant, which is what leadership is all about, serving the people, becomes serve us. The third biggest problem in the world is pandemic diseases. I've already mentioned AIDS. But the problem we have today is that most of the diseases that billions of people are suffering from, we figured out how to prevent or how to cure in the 20th century, in the 19th century, and it's the 21st century. We know the cure for measles, for mumps, for malaria. We know the cure for yellow fever, for typhus, for waterborne eye diseases. This year, 500 million people in the world will get malaria. Friends, this isn't rocket science. We figured out how to cure malaria 100 years ago during Teddy Roosevelt's administration. It's not rocket science. It's a little quinine water, it's a bed net, it's removed standing water, and maybe spray a little DDT. They wiped it out in Panama in 2 years. We used to have malaria in America. Nobody gets malaria in America more. Why? We wiped it out. Well, why are we still having 500 million people in the world get malaria every year? Because we don't have leaders who will say enough is enough. We're not going to put up with this anymore. We're going to stop it. 3 years ago in Southeast Asia, when there was that tsunami and 240,000 people were killed, and one of my associate pastors stood up at Saddleback and said, folks, we need to help those people. And just on the basis of a 30-second announcement, our church gave $1.6 million for that tsunami. 9 months later, gave $1.7 million to Katrina. And we all and the world poured out resources to the 240,000 that were killed in the tsunami. But we have a tsunami every 8 days. According to the United Nations, 30,000 children die every single day. That means every 8 days we have a tsunami. 240,000 children die every 8 days from preventable diseases. That is unconscionable. Now think about this. There are 1 billion Muslims in the world. There are about 2 billion Christians in the world. If just the two of us could get together to start working on these problems, that'd be half the world. Okay? I mean, that'd be half the world, really. There are 600,000 Buddhists and 800,000 Hindus. I mean, if we just worked on those things, how do you do it? How do we work together when we have differences? Because we have differences. So what? Does it mean we can't work together? Does it mean we can't love each other? You start with the hand. You start with the hand, and you move to the heart, and then you move to the head. The problem is, all of the battles are fought head to head over ideas. Start with the hands and work together. We're working on a project right now in Rwanda where 18 churches and 4 mosques or Islamic centers together, we are training them together in doing health care out of their congregation right now. So there's spiritual emptiness, and there's a lack of trained ethical leadership, corruption. There's pandemic diseases. The fourth is extreme poverty. Half of the world lives on less than $2 a day. 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. We're working in countries, my church right now is working in 68 countries. In the last 4 years, I've had over 8,000 of my members helping the poor overseas in 68 countries. We're working in places like Rwanda, where the average income is 68 cents a day. Now, they grow coffee in Rwanda, and they sell it to Starbucks. But the average farmer doesn't make enough in one day to buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks. That's just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. And the key to getting people out of poverty is not a handout, it's a hand up. It's trade, not aid. When you give people what they could develop themselves, you rob them of dignity, you turn them into victims. You create an expectation mentality. In the last 50 years, the West has put over $500 billion into Africa, and the standard of living is worse in every country. It's not a matter of giving. It's the only way you get people out of poverty, jobs. Then the fifth thing, the fifth big problem is illiteracy. Half of the world cannot read or write. And it doesn't matter if we wire the whole world for internet. If you can't read or write, you're left out. There's no way you're going to have a job in the 21st century if you can't read or write. Now, these problems are so big, the United Nations has failed, and the United States has failed, and everybody else has failed. There's only one organization or organizations big enough to take it on. It is the spiritual bodies. I could take you to 10 million villages around the world, the only thing in it's church. And I could take you to millions of villages around the world where the only thing in it's a mosque. There are more boots on the ground there, and hundreds of millions of people volunteer through their spiritual base on a weekly basis. What if we were able to mobilize that for these big issues? Sitting on the ground there, I came up with a plan we called the Peace Plan, P-E-A-C-E. Promote reconciliation, that's the P. Equip leaders, that's the E. Assist the poor. Care for the sick. Educate the next generation. We've been doing this now for 6 years. And we're doing it with anybody who wants to work. In fact, I've found we're more willing to work with people than people are willing to work with us. And you know what? My attitude is you don't have to see eye to walk hand in hand. And you can disagree without being disagreeable. And this is what Barack Obama and I happen to agree on. 3 years ago, I took enormous heat for inviting Barack Obama to Saddleback Church because he had some views that people in my church would disagree with. And so what? And now, 3 years later, he's invited me to the inauguration. That's been a big deal. But you know what? I didn't come here to talk about that. But the point I want to make is, here are two guys who said, we have to restore civility to civilization. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but the world is getting ruder. It's getting more mean. It's getting more hateful. I don't have a right to hate anybody, even if they hate me. I am commanded to love them. And so we have to just work on the stuff we can agree on together. Now, here is my challenge to you as leaders in MPAC. And you're a leader because you're here tonight. The very fact that you're here means that you are a Muslim leader. And I honor you for that. I was asked the other day, what do you pray for the president? And I said, I pray for the president the same thing that I pray for myself. Integrity, humility, and generosity. Because these are the three things that insulate you from the three traps that cause most leaders to stumble. First, you have to have integrity. Now, what is integrity? People think integrity means honesty. Oh, but it's far more than that. Integrity comes from the word integer or integer. It means a unit of one. It means your life is whole. It means your life is not divided up in a pie. And if you segment your life into segments, you lack integrity. If you say, well, this is my social life, and this is my mosque life, or this is my sex life, or this is my business life, or this is my golf life, or this is my social life, and you segment it, you are lacking integrity. A lot of people fall for what I call the Titanic myth. The Titanic was supposedly unsinkable. And the reason why it was supposed to be unsinkable was the first ship where they segmented the hull. Prior to the Titanic, all ships just had a hull. And if you got a hole in the boat, it filled up the whole hull with water and the boat sank. So they said, what we'll do is kind of like submarines. We'll segment the hull. And theoretically, you could hit an iceberg, take on water in a certain segment of your life, and then it wouldn't sink, or a certain segment of the boat. Well, theoretically, that's true. But you know, folks, a hole in the boat is a hole in the boat is a hole in the boat. And it sank. And if you and I are sitting in a boat together, rowboat, and I'm sitting at one end, I start drilling a hole, and you say, what are you doing? I said, well, don't bother you. It's just my life. I start drilling a hole. It's going to sink the boat. We have to care about each other. We have to care about each other. And integrity is not perfection. Otherwise, none of us would ever have integrity, because nobody's perfect. In fact, I've discovered God only uses imperfect people. Otherwise, nothing would get done. But integrity is being honest and open and willing to say, I'm going to grow in all the areas of my life: physical, financial, spiritual, social, mental, relational, and all these different areas. So you need integrity to be a leader. The second thing you have to have as a leader is you have to have humility. Now, humility is one of the most misunderstood concepts. People think humility means going around saying, oh, I'm no good, I'm nothing, and you know, I'm just, a bunch of, baloney or whatever. No. That's actually false humility. False humility is a form of pride. You're saying, oh, it's like the woman who every time she fixes a meal, she starts telling you everything wrong with it. It's basically, please compliment me. Come on. Okay? It's a false humility. Humility is not denying your strengths. Humility is being honest about your weaknesses. And all of us are a bundle of strengths and weaknesses. You have some great strengths. You have some great weaknesses. I got some great strengths. I have some great weaknesses. Just ask my wife, ask my staff. In fact, ask me. I'll tell you. I know them better than anybody. But humility is saying, I am going to not just depend on myself. I'm going to depend on God, and I'm going to humble myself, and I'm going to be honest about everything that happens in my life. You're clapping enough. I hope you invite me back, inshallah. The third thing you need is you need generosity. You spell love G-I-V-E. You also spell love T-I-M-E. The greatest use of your life is love. The greatest time to love is now. The greatest expression of love is time. And love is what it's all about. In fact, one day Jesus was asked, can you summarize it all? He said, yeah, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. It's all about love. And love is generosity. That's when I was sitting here listening to this, the fundraising going on, and going, well, that's a good thing. I never apologize either with Dr. Hathout that encouraging people to give. Why? Because I know what it does to them. When I wrote The Purpose-Driven Life 6 years ago, nobody knew that it would become the bestseller it was. It became the best-selling hardback English book in history. It's in Guinness. It sold, 30, 40 million in English, and it is the most translated book in the world, except for the Bible. And it's on over 100 languages. When that book went around the world, it brought in tens of millions of dollars. And I'll be honest with you, it scared me. It also brought in a lot of attention, because I wasn't interested in attention. I really wasn't. And all of a sudden, I started having to pray, God, what do you want me to do with the money? And what do you want me to do with the attention? I call it the stewardship of affluence and the stewardship of influence. Because, when you write a book and the first sentence of the book is, it's not about you, then when it makes tens of millions of dollars, you got to figure, it's not for you. The truth is, after Purpose-Driven Life came out, I could have gone out and bought an island and retired and had people serve me iced tea with little umbrellas the rest of my life. But that's not the purpose of life. That's not what life's all about. So I said, what am I supposed to do with it? And I don't have time to go into it, but Kay and I made 5 decisions on what to do with the money because I wanted to learn to be generous. The first thing that we did is we said we're not going to change our lifestyle one bit. I still live in the same house I've lived in 16 years. I drive a 10-year-old Ford truck. I bought my watch at Kmart. Okay? Actually, I bought it at Walmart, actually. My idea is you got a good pair of jeans and a t-shirt. What else do you need in life, really? And so I said, we're not going to change our lifestyle. Second thing, I stopped taking a salary from my church. Third, I added up all the church had paid me in 25 years, and I gave it all back. And I did that because I didn't want anybody to doubt why I do what I do, thinking that I do it for money. I don't do it for money. I do it because I love God. I love Him with all my heart. And if He never did anything else for me, I owe Him the rest of my life. The fourth thing we did is we set up 3 different foundations. One is called the Peace Fund, and one is called Equipping Leaders, and one is called Acts of Mercy, which is we've been able to help a lot of people with AIDS all around the world. And the fifth thing my wife and I did is we became reverse tithers. Now, the word tithe means 10%, of course. And when Kay and I got married 33 years ago, we said, we're going to give 10% of our income away. The Bible says to do it, and we're just going to do it. And as gratitude for the past, makes my priorities right in the present, gives me hope in the future, trust in the future, and what God wants to do. At the end of our first year of marriage, we raised our tithe to 11%. At the end of our second year of marriage, we raised our tithe giving to charities away to 12%. At the end of our third year of marriage, we raised it to 13%. On years that we had very, very tight finances, we'd raise our giving just a little fraction of a percent. And on years that we'd get a raise or a bonus or something, we'd raise our giving 4 or 5%. The Bible didn't say to do this. Every time I give, it breaks the grip of materialism in my life. Every time I give, my heart grows bigger. And every time I give, I become more loving. My wife and I have been married for 33 years. We give away 90% and live on 10%. Now, I'm not saying that to impress you because we didn't tell anybody about it for over 30 years. It was just a secret habit among us. We told nobody about it for over 30 years. But I'm telling you this, you cannot outgive God. I've been playing this little game with God for 33 years where God says, you give to me and you give away and I'll give to you and we'll see who wins. And I've lost that game for 33 years. I have no intention at stopping at 90%, but going on and on and on. So here's my challenge to you, dear friends, tonight. We need to build civility into our society. We need to build trust in our society. We need to build love in our society. We need to build respect for people even when we disagree. We're never going to agree on everything. That doesn't mean we can't love each other, we can't be friends, we can't respect each other, and we can't work on things like poverty, disease, illiteracy, and things like that. And I come here tonight as a Christian pastor, and I reach out my hand to the Muslim community, and I say, let us work on these issues together. Let us work on these issues together. And just maybe some good stories will start coming out in the media. Melissa and I had a wonderful conversation today. She's incredible. Don't you think she's incredible? Unbelievable. I think I have every single album she's ever done since 1988 when she did the first self-titled Melissa Etheridge album. And I'm enough of a groupie. I got her to sign the Christmas album today, so But we were conversing today about how so many things, you can't get it from secondary sources. You can't learn about Muslims from secondary sources. You can't learn about gays from secondary sources. You can't learn about Christians or Jews or Democrats or Republicans or anybody else. You have to meet people. And you know what I've discovered? When you meet people, you like them. It's easy to hate somebody you've never met. It's almost impossible not to like them, because most people are genuinely likable. I thank you for inviting me here tonight. I honor you as Muslim Americans who love freedom, who love this country as much as I do. And I'm saying, let us not let other people set the agenda or set the definition of you or Melissa or me or anybody else for that matter, because this is America. God bless you.